The storm had no mercy that night. Thick sheets of rain poured down, soaking every inch of Alina's shivering body. She stood frozen near Pump 6, eyes wide in disbelief, as the taillights of Jason's luxury sedan vanished into the pitch-black road ahead.
No volví.
No glance back. Just the sharp sting of abandonment piercing through the sound of thunder. Her breath caught as reality set in. He had really left her. Alone. Pregnant. At a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Alina's hands instinctively shielded her growing belly, as if trying to protect the one thing she had left. Jason's child. The same man who had once promised to cherish her, now discarded her like a forgotten receipt. She had believed his love was real, that their vows meant something. But in the end, all it took was a prettier face and a wealthier family for him to walk away. "She's everything you'll never be," he'd said coldly before slamming the door shut. That was the last thing he ever said to her. The woman he left her for, Celeste, was younger, came from old money, and had connections powerful enough to open doors Jason couldn't access on his own. For him, love had always been transactional. Alina, once his beloved wife, had become a liability, a mistake to erase. She staggered forward, soaked to the bone, her heels scraping against the rain-slick concrete. Her mind couldn't keep up with the pain. The station's flickering neon lights buzzed above her, casting harsh shadows on the pavement. She had nowhere to go. No car.
No bolit.
Just a half-dead phone and a suitcase Jason had tossed beside the pump before driving off. It was like something out of a cruel dream. A single blinking vacancy sign in the distance pulled her attention. A worn-down roadside motel stood at the edge of the highway, its sign barely lit, as if ashamed to still be running. She dragged herself toward it, her soaked dress clinging to her like a second skin, her diamond ring catching the dim glow of a parking light. The ring that had once symbolized commitment now felt like a mocking souvenir. Inside the cramped motel room, the smell of mildew mixed with her perfume. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe he'd call. Maybe he'd text. Maybe this was all some twisted test. She reached for her phone and unlocked the screen. Breaking news. Jason Renner engaged to Celeste Arlington, the headline read. She blinked.
Once. Twice.
But the words didn't change. Her fingers trembled, and the phone slipped from her hand, crashing to the tile floor. Her knees buckled as she fell to the ground, hands pressed against her stomach. A silent scream caught in her throat as her vision blurred from a fresh wave of tears. He hadn't just left, he'd erased her.
Publicly.
The man who had held her hand during sonograms was now sipping champagne in tuxedoed celebration with another woman. Social media erupted with congratulatory comments and heart emojis, the press branding their engagement, a match made in elite heaven. Alina's name wasn't even a footnote. It was as if she'd never existed. As if she had never been his wife. As if the baby inside her was invisible. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep making stories like this. The ache in her chest turned physical, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. She wasn't crying anymore, she was crumbling. Her heart had been shattered, and the pieces now pressed against her from the inside, reminding her with every beat that she had been discarded like yesterday's trash. The storm outside howled louder, matching the hurricane inside her. But then something shifted. A faint creak. A whisper of movement. She wasn't alone. Alina's body tensed as she looked toward the doorway. A man emerged from the shadows, his frame steady, his steps confident. The overhead light caught on the edge of his jawline, sharp, calculated. His voice was soft but chilling. "You're not as forgotten as you think." She wanted to scream, to demand who he was and why he was there. But his gaze held her in place, not threatening, but intense. Like he knew something she didn't. His name was Armin Cade, an investigative journalist known for toppling corporate empires and exposing billionaires who thought they were above consequences. He wasn't here by accident. He had followed a trail of corruption, and it had led him straight to Jason. Offshore accounts. Phantom companies. Millions laundered behind the smokescreen of high society. And now, standing before Alina, He slid a flash drive across the nightstand. "What's this?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "The end of his empire," he replied. Alina hesitated. Her world had just collapsed, and now this stranger was offering her the match to light Jason's carefully constructed kingdom on fire. She didn't understand the full picture, but she understood enough. Jason hadn't just broken her heart, he had buried secrets. Secrets Armin now wanted to expose. But truth wasn't simple. It never was. Because buried within those files wasn't just fraud. There was Celeste. Not just Jason's new fiancée, but a collaborator. A woman who had spent months positioning herself in Jason's orbit, manipulating his every move, whispering in his ear while hiding knives behind her back. She hadn't come for love. She had come for control. And Alina, she was never supposed to find out. But now that she had, everything was unraveling. As the night wore on, Alina stared at the flash drive resting on the table like it carried dynamite. Armin said little more, just gave her a nod, and left her with a choice. Stay silent, or shatter the illusion Jason had built for the world. Her hands trembled as she picked up the device. She hadn't asked for war, but it had found her. The files inside were damning. Dozens of shell companies connected to Jason's name, false invoices, altered signatures, massive wire transfers masked as charity contributions. It wasn't just bad behavior, it was a criminal web. And Celeste? She wasn't just in the picture. She was part of the blueprint. Transactions traced to her family foundation. Travel logs. Matching signatures. She wasn't just his lover, she was his partner in crime. Alina's breath caught in her throat. The man who had abandoned her, who once kissed her stomach and whispered baby names, had been building his empire on deception. And the woman he ran to had been playing him just as he had played everyone else. She wasn't a mistress, she was the puppeteer. The next morning, Alina awoke to find a sleek black envelope slipped under her motel door. Inside were divorce papers already signed. Her signature forged at the bottom. The message was clear. He hadn't just left her emotionally, he had erased her legally. The marriage was gone, dissolved without her knowing. She raced to call lawyers, but every office she reached gave her the same response. "Sorry, we can't take your case." It wasn't coincidence, it was control. Jason had shut every door before she even knocked. She was invisible in the eyes of the law. No rights, no voice, no leverage. But what Jason didn't realize was that when you strip someone down to nothing, you give them nothing left to lose. And Alina? She had one thing left. The truth. Jason was days away from closing a $500 million deal, one that would propel his company into global relevance. The media was buzzing. Investors circled like hawks, eager to throw money at his so-called genius. But beneath that perfect press coverage, cracks were forming. All it would take was one leak, one whisper of doubt to collapse the empire. Armin returned 3 days later with a laptop and an encrypted file ready for release. Alina sat beside him, eyes scanning line after line of data that painted Jason not as a visionary, but a fraud. This wasn't just business gone wrong. This was orchestrated theft. She looked at Armin. "If I do this, there's no coming back." "You're already gone," he replied. "Might as well take your voice with you." With a deep breath, she clicked send. The files were delivered anonymously to a consortium of journalists, government watchdogs, and regulatory boards. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Billionaire Jason Renner investigated for corporate fraud. Headlines dominated every screen. Stocks tanked. Partners bailed. The deal collapsed.
And Jason?
He was blindsided. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Board members demanded answers. Reporters camped outside his penthouse. He called Celeste, but she didn't answer. The perfect partner had gone silent. He tried reaching his legal team, only to be told they were no longer representing him. He even tried calling Alina, but the number had changed. Then came the arrest warrant. Not for Jason yet, but for one of his executives. Someone close. Someone who started talking the moment cuffs went on. The walls were closing in, and Jason, for the first time in his life, wasn't in control. In a final desperate move, he tried to flip the story. He accused Alina of blackmail, leaked fabricated messages, and pushed a fake scandal to the media. But the world wasn't buying it. His credibility was gone. And besides, someone else had already prepared for that. Celeste. Alina had assumed Celeste would vanish once Jason's empire crumbled. But instead, she re-emerged at a press conference. Alone. And, on the other side, cameras flashed as she took the podium and spoke, not in defense of Jason, but as his accuser. She laid bare the full truth: how she had been coerced into helping him, how he manipulated her, and how she cooperated with authorities in exchange for immunity. It was a masterstroke. She walked away clean. But her betrayal was more than strategic. It was personal. Because standing behind her at the conference, unnoticed by many but seen by Jason through a live stream, was a face he never expected: Derek Hughes. His oldest rival. A man he'd crushed in Usiness years ago. A man who never forgot. Together, Celeste and Derek had orchestrated the exposure. Every leak, every connection. They had planned this from the inside, using Jason's arrogance as their greatest weapon. And Alina? She hadn't just survived the betrayal, she'd outlived it. Her silence had ended, replaced by the sound of truth spreading through headlines. Jason's fall wasn't private. It was public, brutal, and irreversible. The days that followed were a blur of flashing cameras, court subpoenas, and public humiliation. Jason couldn't walk outside without facing the fallout. His once loyal staff had either turned on him or disappeared. His closest allies refused to answer his calls. Every newscast dissected his downfall with delight. The same media that once glorified him now treated him like a cautionary tale. The final blow came during the Investor Summit, a grand gala where Jason had planned to announce his next phase of expansion. Dressed in a sharp tuxedo, he entered the ballroom with defiant arrogance, trying to salvage the remnants of his public image. But the moment he stepped inside, all conversations ceased. Because standing under the chandeliers, wrapped in satin and strength, was Alina. Heads turned. Whispers spread. It had been months since she'd vanished from the spotlight. And now, here she was, glowing, composed, untouchable. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her presence alone silenced him. Jason froze. His fingers clenched around his glass as he scanned the room. Then he saw her, Celeste. Not at his side, but across the room, laughing with Derek Hughes. And suddenly, Jason understood. He wasn't feared anymore. He was pitied. But the humiliation wasn't over. In a moment designed to destroy him completely, Celeste raised her glass and said loudly, "To lessons learned, not prizes won." Gasps echoed. Phones came out. Cameras flashed. Jason turned red, then pale. The words weren't just personal, they were surgical. She hadn't come to celebrate. She had come to finish what she started. And the world watched every second of it. Security had to escort Jason out of the venue as whispers turned to snickers. Headlines the next morning were merciless. Renner outclassed at his own gala. Alina returns, Celeste delivers public blow. The photos went viral, Jason looking defeated, while Alina looked unstoppable. He had spent his entire career building an empire based on manipulation and intimidation. But now, stripped of allies, wealth, and influence, he was just another disgraced tycoon. Alina, meanwhile, was on the rise. With Armin's help, she secured legal action against Jason, not through corporate lawyers, but through whistleblower protection and investigative leverage. She didn't need to win in court, she just needed to keep the truth in public. And the public was paying attention. By the end of the month, Jason's accounts were frozen, assets seized, his penthouse repossessed. And Alina, once left on the side of a highway in the rain, was now the subject of glowing features in major publications. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. But not everyone was done playing. One morning, Alina found a note slipped under her door. It was short, handwritten in thick, black ink. "You've made enemies. Walk away now before it's too late." There was no signature. No name. Just a warning. Armin insisted on tightening security. He had seen this before. Billionaires didn't go down quietly. They tried to pull others with them. Alina tried to dismiss it as fear tactics, but deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Because someone else was pulling strings. And they hadn't shown their face yet. As she scanned the people around her bodyguards, staff, media contacts, her mind kept circling back to one person. Celeste. Her story had been too neat. Too rehearsed. Her betrayal of Jason had positioned her perfectly for a new narrative. A redemption arc. But what if it wasn't redemption? What if it was strategy? Alina began digging bank transfers, call logs, event schedules. What she found sent chills down her spine. Celeste had been present at every key moment, every business deal Jason closed, every political connection he forged. She hadn't just played along. She had designed the entire downfall. Jason was never the architect of his own empire. He was the face, the name, the arrogance. But the moves? The manipulation? That had been Celeste. And now, with Jason removed, Celeste was building something of her own. A consulting firm. Government ties. Rumors of lobbying connections. She had used Jason to climb and discarded him when he was no longer useful. Alina had thought Jason was the villain. But Celeste? She was the true strategist. The one who pulled every string while keeping her hands clean. And Alina had unknowingly helped her win. She sat in her office late that night, the city skyline stretching wide beyond the window. The documents lay scattered across her desk. Evidence. Patterns. A game of chess where she'd been a piece, not a player. The knock at her door startled her. Armin stepped inside, his face tense. "Another message," he said, handing her a folded note. This one was even shorter. "You're not done yet." Alina leaned back, heart pounding. It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. She had taken down Jason. But the real danger was still out there. And this time, the enemy wasn't blinded by ego. They were prepared. Alina knew she was dealing with something far more complex than a broken marriage or a single betrayal. This wasn't just about Jason's downfall anymore. This was a power structure, one carefully hidden, layered with illusions, and controlled by someone who knew exactly how to blend into the background. And Celeste, she had become the prime suspect. Days turned into weeks as Alina and Armin quietly gathered intel. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. Celeste had been present at strategic points across multiple corporate deals, not just Jason's, but 3 other major companies that had experienced sudden leadership collapses. She always arrived just before things began to unravel. And she always walked away clean. The final puzzle piece came in the form of an email leak, anonymous, encrypted, and damning. Attached were memos, recordings, and correspondence between Celeste and someone identified only as SR. The messages revealed plans for acquisition, manipulation, and takedown strategies. Celeste hadn't been a victim, nor a misguided lover.
She was a plant.
A closer. Her rise wasn't about love. It was about empire building through calculated destruction. Alina stared at the screen in stunned silence. Celeste had used Jason and, before him, others. Powerful men brought to their knees while she positioned herself for a higher seat at the table. It was terrifying and brilliant, but it also meant that Alina hadn't just survived Jason. She had stumbled into the crosshairs of someone much more dangerous. Armin leaned over her shoulder. "This isn't about revenge anymore," he said quietly. "It's about survival." That night, Alina received another message. Not a note. A package. Inside was a simple object, a chess piece. The queen. Nothing else. No threat. No words. Just the unmistakable symbolism. A warning that the game had shifted. And Alina was now officially part of it. The next morning, she called a meeting with her board. Investors had been watching the headlines closely, wondering if the company would collapse with Jason gone. Instead, they saw something else. Confidence. Alina walked into the conference room with poise, dressed in a navy blue suit that matched her determination. She didn't just outline recovery, she pitched a new vision. Transparent leadership. Clean audits. A rebuild from the ground up. And they bought in. She left the meeting with unanimous support and a round of applause. Her name was trending again, not as Jason's ex-wife, but as the woman who turned his wreckage into renewal. But just as she started to believe stability was possible, her phone lit up with a name she hadn't seen in months. Jason. Her heart skipped, not from affection, but wariness. She answered with caution. Alina, his voice was hoarse, subdued. I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but you need to hear this. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't even apologize. He just warned her, Celeste isn't done. You think you beat her, but that was just her opening move. Alina said nothing. She used me, he continued, and I deserved everything I got. But she sees you as a problem. Alina clenched her jaw. I'm not afraid of her. Jason chuckled bitterly. You should be. The call ended without resolution, but something in his voice, so unlike the man she once knew, lingered. He sounded broken and scared. Armin didn't trust the call. It could be manipulation, he warned, or a setup. But Alina had learned to trust her instincts. And this time, they told her something bigger was coming. That evening, while reviewing files in her apartment, the lights cut out. Total darkness. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Step away from the game, Alina, the voice whispered. It wasn't Celeste. It was a man. Calm, measured, and chilling. You've had your victory. Don't press your luck. The line went dead. Alina stood frozen in place. This wasn't just a threat, it was a command. And she didn't respond well to commands. Armin ramped up surveillance and cyber protection. They traced the call to a burner phone untraceable. But the message had been received. Someone was watching, waiting, ready to strike if needed. Still, Alina refused to run. If anything, the warning gave her clarity. She hadn't been dragged into this war, she had walked into it, eyes wide open. And she wasn't going to be chased out. She gathered her core team, Armin, a trusted advisor, and 2 newly recruited forensic accountants, and laid out a plan. Not to expose Celeste just for revenge, but to dismantle the network behind her. Because if Celeste was the queen, there were still kings, bishops, and pawns in play. And Alina was tired of being a piece on someone else's board. One name kept surfacing through the financial trails: Samuel Rivas, a venture capitalist with ties to international shell corporations and former ties to 2 governments. The same SR from the leaked emails. And he had just donated $10 million to Celeste's new lobbying firm. Everything was starting to connect. But it also meant the game wasn't over, it was escalating. Alina stood at the edge of something bigger than she'd ever faced. Jason had been a personal betrayal, but Samuel Rivas and Celeste were an empire built on precision, secrets, and silence. And she had just lit a fuse under their foundation. The deeper she went, the more she uncovered. Samuel Rivas wasn't just funding Celeste's firm, he was orchestrating global takeovers by destabilizing CEOs and placing his own loyal operatives in their place. Celeste was his crown piece. Beautiful, polished, unassuming. The perfect infiltrator. Together, they had toppled 4 corporations without anyone ever connecting the dots. Until now, Alina had the files, the evidence, the shell company names, the dates, the calls. Armin's face was pale as they stared at the map sprawled across their office table lines connecting offshore accounts, flights, silent resignations, and sudden boardroom takeovers. This isn't about Jason anymore, Armin said quietly. This is a machine, a global one. And Alina, unintentionally, had become a threat to its gears. She wasn't afraid, but she was cautious. Every time she stepped outside, she scanned the streets. Every time the phone rang, she paused. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. One morning, her apartment doorman handed her a manila envelope. No postie. No label. Just her name scrawled in bold letters. Inside were photos. Surveillance shots of her walking home. Of Armin leaving her building. Of her sitting in a cafe with her legal advisor. Someone was documenting her every move. Watching. Recording. And now letting her know. The message was clear. Stop digging. Instead, Alina went deeper. She held a secret press meeting with 3 independent journalists Armin trusted. Off the record, behind closed doors, she laid out part of the story. Not names. Not full details, but enough to get them interested. Enough to make them start watching Celeste and Samuel. The journalists bit. They began poking at Celeste's past, tracking her travels, her connections, her finances. Within a week, one of them went silent. His social media accounts disappeared. His email bounced back. He stopped replying. Armin tried to call in a favor from a cybersecurity expert, only to be told that the reporter had voluntarily taken a leave of absence. But no one could verify it. Alina's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about power. This was about control. Erasure. People didn't just lose careers, they vanished. Still, she pressed forward. She knew that the only way out was through. That night, she appeared on a live stream hosted by a popular investigative news channel. She didn't name names, but she spoke about abuse of power, about how billionaires use silence as their greatest weapon. She talked about being erased, about rebuilding, about refusing to be intimidated. It went viral.
Millionaire. Support poured in.
And for the first time, the public narrative shifted. She wasn't just a woman who escaped betrayal. She was a force exposing a much darker undercurrent in elite business circles. And that scared them, because now, she wasn't alone. The very next morning, Celeste made a public appearance. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't even a counterattack. It was a strategy. She appeared on a national business show, speaking softly, dressed in white, her hands clasped like a grieving widow. She said she had been used by powerful men, that she was recovering from emotional trauma, and that some women fight quietly. It was calculated, strategic, and worse, it worked. Comments flooded in. Sympathy. Support.
Tears.
Suddenly, the woman orchestrating takedowns was now rebranded as a survivor. Armin was furious. She's stealing your narrative. Alina remained calm. She can have it. I'm not here to win pity. I'm here to burn down the truth. The final blow came from an unexpected place, Jason. After months of silence, he released a public statement. Not to save face, but to confess. He admitted to the fraud, the offshore accounts, the manipulation. But more importantly, he confirmed what Alina had uncovered. Celeste had been involved in every deal. Samuel Rivas had funded everything. And Jason, in his own twisted way, had finally chosen a side. The internet exploded. The stock market dipped. And Celeste? She vanished. No press. No response.
No trace.
Alina knew what that meant. She wasn't hiding. She was repositioning. Which is why, a few days later, when a court summons arrived listing Alina as the defendant in a $50 million defamation suit filed by an anonymous international holding group, she didn't flinch. She expected it. This was their retaliation. But she was ready, because the evidence was now in the hands of more than just her team. It had spread. Quietly.
Safely.
And taking her down wouldn't silence what had already been set in motion. Jason was facing criminal charges. Samuel's financial ties were being audited by the Department of Treasury. And Celeste? She had gone dark. But Alina knew somewhere in the shadows. She was watching, waiting, planning. And Alina would be ready. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was a war. And she wasn't fighting alone. Alina sat across from her legal team, her expression calm but resolute. The courtroom battle would begin in less than 2 weeks. But this time, she wasn't just defending herself. She was representing every woman who had been told to stay quiet, every whistleblower shut down before they could speak, every person erased by powerful systems that profited from silence. The lawsuit against her was brutal. $50 million. Filed by a faceless holding company with assets buried across 3 countries. On paper, it had nothing to do with Celeste or Samuel Rivas. But the timing, the tactics, the sudden vanishing of one of the journalists, it all pointed in one direction. They weren't trying to win in court. They were trying to bury her in paperwork, bleed her dry with legal fees, and scare her into backing down. They underestimated her again. What they didn't know was that Alina had quietly partnered with a whistleblower defense fund. The organization had taken on her case pro bono, mobilizing a team of experts in international fraud, defamation law, and cybercrime. And behind closed doors, even more powerful support was emerging. One morning, she was invited to a private meeting with an unlikely ally, the wife of a U.S. senator. The woman had followed Alina's live stream, read the reports, and knew something darker was at play. She didn't offer political favors. She offered access to investigators, to financial regulators, to people who could actually hold billionaires accountable. "You have a bigger story than you think," she told Alina. "Don't just defend yourself. Expose them." Meanwhile, Jason's cooperation with federal authorities accelerated the timeline of the investigation. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he began turning over files, hard drives, encrypted documents, insider memos. Everything he had once used to control others was now being used to unravel the truth. For the first time in his life, Jason Renner wasn't the puppet master. He was the leverage. Alina didn't forgive him. But she understood one thing: his destruction was a useful tool. And he knew it. Maybe he did it out of guilt. Or maybe it was just survival. Either way, he was finally speaking the truth. And that truth started a chain reaction. Several board members from Jason's former companies stepped down quietly. 2 senior executives fled the country. A third was arrested trying to board a private jet. It was chaos. And Celeste? Still missing. No press appearances.
No statements.
Her social media wiped clean. Her home address was vacant. But her silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like preparation. Then came the letter. Not emailed. Not typed. Handwritten in the same bold, black ink as before. "You've won the battle, Alina. But the game isn't over. Be ready."
No signature.
No location. But the letter smelled faintly of Jasmine Celeste's signature perfume. Alina read it 3 times. Not with fear, but with resolve. This wasn't over. Not even close. She called Armin and told him it was time. They compiled everything: Jason's testimony, financial trails, forged contracts, hidden assets. Then, with the help of her legal team and the whistleblower group, they submitted the entire case to the Department of Justice, the SEC, and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. A press embargo was placed on the files. The moment the agencies confirmed their investigation had launched, the embargo would lift and the evidence would go public. Alina didn't want to just defend herself in court. She wanted to make sure that no one like Celeste or Samuel could erase someone again. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the room was packed. Cameras lined the hallways. Protesters stood outside holding signs that read, "Truth over power," and she fought back. Alina stepped into the courtroom with a quiet calm. Not a victim. Not a martyr. A warrior. The plaintiff's lawyers tried everything, discrediting her, questioning her motives, painting her as a jilted ex-wife hungry for attention. But every accusation they threw fell flat. Because Alina had something far more powerful than money. She had the truth. And the receipts. One by one, her lawyers presented the evidence: fraudulent company transfers, secret meetings, Jason's sworn testimony, and the same shell corpo. Rations linked to Samuel Rivas's holdings. The judge didn't rule immediately. But the tone of the courtroom had shifted. The plaintiff's counsel looked shaken. The crowd outside grew louder. That evening, the embargo was lifted. The files went public. News outlets exploded with coverage. Whistleblower Alina Renner links global fraud ring to anonymous holding companies. The story led every headline. Morning talk shows. International news. Finance blogs. It was everywhere. And now, the world knew what Alina had fought through, what she had exposed. Celeste's name wasn't in the documents. But everyone knew. She had gone silent. But not forgotten. Because now, even the shadows weren't safe. Weeks passed, and while the media frenzy swirled, Alina remained grounded. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was building something lasting. Her name had become synonymous with resilience and reform. She wasn't just the woman left at a gas station anymore. She was the woman who rewrote the rules. In the wake of the courtroom drama and financial exposure, Alina launched an initiative called Project Reclaim. It was more than a foundation, it was a movement. focused on protecting whistleblowers, training journalists, and funding investigations into corporate abuse. It quickly gained traction. Former victims, ex-employees, and even insiders began coming forward. Quietly.
Carefully.
And through Project Reclaim, their stories began finding daylight. Alina's story had given them courage. One crisp autumn morning, she stood on the steps of a Capitol Hill building, surrounded by supporters and fellow advocates, preparing to testify before a congressional committee.
Her voice was steady.
Her story clear. The silence that Jason and his circle once depended on no longer existed. And across the world, Celeste watched. In an anonymous cafe tucked into a coastal European town, Celeste sipped espresso, watching Alina's testimony play on a muted television. Her expression didn't waver.
No panique. No regret.
Just quiet calculation. Because even in retreat, she was studying the board. But the game had changed. Alina no longer operated in isolation. She had partners. A movement. A public spotlight that couldn't be shut off with a letter or a silent threat. She had become untouchable in a way Celeste had never predicted because her power came from truth, not illusion. Months passed. Investigations grew. More arrests followed. Samuel Rivas faced indictment in 2 countries. Frozen assets. International warrants. He tried to flee under a false identity, but was apprehended at a private airport in Lisbon. As for Jason, he pled guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The court acknowledged his cooperation, but didn't excuse his crimes. On the day of sentencing, he looked across the courtroom at Alina and gave a faint nod. Not of apology, but of acknowledgement. He knew she had become what he never could.
Free.
Celeste's fate, however, remained a mystery. Some claimed she'd fled to a country with no extradition treaty. Others believed she was still operating quietly, building new identities, playing a longer game. Alina wasn't obsessed with chasing her anymore, because the story had moved on, and so had she. One evening, as the city skyline blinked to life, Alina stood alone on the rooftop of her downtown office. The same view Jason once controlled now belonged to her. Armin joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Looks different now, doesn't it?" he said, handing her one. Alina nodded, smiling softly. "It's not the view that changed. It's me." She had spent months clawing her way out of a trap designed to erase her. And now, she stood not just above the city, but above the lies, betrayals, and games that once defined her life. She hadn't just survived the storm. She had become the storm. And though the scars remained deep, quiet, unspoken, they were no longer wounds. They were armor. Armin leaned against the railing beside her. "So, what happens now?" Alina looked out over the horizon, her voice quiet but certain. "Now we build. We protect the next one they try to silence." Below them, the lights of Project Reclaim new headquarters flickered on. A former investment firm building now repurposed into a sanctuary for truth seekers. A place where no voice would be buried again. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I'm still watching. Always will be.
See."
Alina stared at the screen, then locked it and slid the phone into her pocket. "You okay?" Armin asked. She nodded. She's not the threat anymore. Her time will come. Because Alina had learned something critical: revenge fades. But the truth remains. And those who build on lies will always fear the day it rises. As the wind brushed against her skin and the city lights shimmered below, Alina closed her eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to breathe. She had come so far from that rainy gas station. From the silence. From the betrayal. She didn't need to punish anyone anymore. Because karma had already done its work. And now, she is writing her next chapter. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know your favorite moment in the comments.